Today we'll be talking a little bit more about neurodegenerative disorders, and a couple of this information is going to be something that's not really covered in the Brain Facts book. Sometimes the Brain Bee does require us to know information outside of the Brain Facts book, so hopefully this slideshow will give you a better idea of some of the information that you might find helpful as you prepare for the competition. So the first disorder that we're going to kind of talk about is Parkinson's disease. So in 1980s, neurologist J. William Langston faced a 44-year-old man diagnosed with Parkinson's. This patient was a particularly young man to be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease because the symptoms usually show up by the age of 60. So Dr. Langston decided to look at the links between all of the other patients who have been diagnosed in the similar age group during that time and compare it with the patient that he had. And the link that he found out between all of these patients was that all of them used a synthetic heroin with MPTP. So MPTP is a chemical that triggers Parkinson's. Scientists used monkeys and they gave MPTP to these monkeys and saw that those monkeys quickly froze and developed tumors in the subthalamic nucleus, which is part of the basal ganglia, a system of parts of the brain which are very much involved in Parkinson's disorder. So the scientists figured out that maybe destroying this brain part would help. However, whenever we destroy a brain part or take a brain part out, there are always side effects. And in this case, it caused more harm than benefit. So scientists decided to figure out if there's a drug that could help alleviate the symptoms. So later on, they figured out that the development of levodopa drug would help with the depletion of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the basal ganglia. Therefore, it would relieve some of the symptoms. In 2009, the FDA also approved deep brain stimulation to help with Parkinson's. Now, deep brain stimulation is usually something that's used for patients with depression in order to alleviate the mood problems. And we don't exactly know how DBS works on the brain for Parkinson's, but it does alleviate some of those symptoms that come along with Parkinson's. So it's kind of a good win-win there. However, there hasn't been a complete cure found to Parkinson's yet. Topic 2 is Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a very, very important part of the chapter in the Brain Facts book. However, there is some information that's not very much thoroughly covered in the book that you might be required to know. So first off, this is a very common question and very important to recognize is that dementia is not a normal part of aging. Yes, we might be less flexible with our memory as we grow older. However, dementia is not the same as just plain old growing old. Alzheimer's, in fact, kills the neurons directly, which shows us that Alzheimer's is a more modified form of aging, which is not healthy. So first off, we're going to talk about Eloy Alzheimer, and I might be pronouncing his name wrong, so sorry. But he was a German psychiatrist and neuroanatomist who had the first glimpse of abnormal clumps and twisted strands of protein. Now, all of us probably know, if we've read the Brain Facts book, that these abnormal clumps are formed due to amyloid beta proteins, and the tau tangles are the ones that are tangles and are twisted strands. Now, what these two entities do is that they basically minimize the functioning of the neuron or disrupt the functioning of the neuron, which goes back to how Alzheimer's is in fact targeting neurons to kill them, especially in areas of the brain which are involved with memory processing. So the hippocampus, for instance, which is important in memory formation and consolidation. So Alzheimer's, again, is not a normal part of aging. dementia is not a normal part of aging. The third topic is Huntington's disease. Huntington's is very interesting because it's associated with the basal ganglia just like Parkinson's is. However, there's a mutation in Huntington's. The mutation is in the Huntington gene. The symptoms of the Huntington's disorder appear by age 40, and symptoms usually include chorea, which is uncontrolled, unwanted movement, personality changes, memory and judgment problems. So it's kind of symptoms all over the board. So for Huntington's, one of the most outside book asked question is like, which animals were studied? Or sometimes they'll sneak in like, for this neurodegenerative disorder, rhesus monkeys were studied upon. That's right, rhesus monkeys. So scientists studied monkeys for many years because Huntington's is not just a disorder that just comes up randomly. Instead, it's something that they want to observe over the years to understand why it comes up. So, according to the brainfacts.org, a drug designed to silence the mutant gene that synthesizes the toxic Huntington's disease protein has been tested in monkeys and is now in clinical trials in humans. So what this is basically explaining to us that scientists try to take that part of the mutation of the gene and try to cut that down using a drug. So right now they're using these monkeys in order to understand whether it's beneficial or not for humans. And it looks like it's beneficial in monkeys. So now the clinical trials are going on in humans. So again, if by any chance they do ask you a question, which neurodegenerative disorder have rhesus monkeys been specifically used for to study, the first thing that should pop up into your mind should be Huntington's disease. And lastly is ALS. So ALS, a lot of it is with the stats for ALS. ALS, about 30,000 patients are living with it at any given time, and about 5,600 patients are diagnosed annually. The average survival time for ALS is about 2 to 5 years after diagnosis. One of the most famous people who has lived with ALS for most of his life is actually Stephen Hawking. So, if you remember back to Stephen Hawking, ALS mainly affects voluntary muscle movement. Now, how this does this is through paralysis. So, first of all, paralysis starts to occur in the muscles in the hands and feet or in the muscles of speech and swallowing. Then comes along weakness in the leg, difficulty walking due to the weakness in the leg, clumsiness of hand when washing and dressing, and then slurred speech. Eventually, all the muscles under voluntary control are affected, including those of respiratory system. And despite the paralysis, however, the mind and the senses remain intact. So they know everything that's going around them, they'll just have paralysis. And death is usually caused by respiratory failure or pneumonia, mainly because those muscles in the respiratory system do get paralyzed. So if the diaphragm gets paralyzed, you won't be able to breathe. And that's usually how the death occurs. Even though death does occur like that, it's a slow process. So it's usually 2 to 5 years afterwards of diagnosis that a person has to live. However, people can outlive that, and a great example of that is Stephen Hawking. So just remember that whenever they do ask for stats like how many years can a person live after being diagnosed? About 2 to 5 years, according to the brainfacts.org. And the main cause of death in ALS is usually respiratory failure or pneumonia. So I hope that you found this video a little helpful in order to prepare for those questions that are sort of out of the book kind of questions. And yeah, so if you want more information to study on how you can prepare for those out of book questions, I would highly suggest going through thebrainfacts.org, and I'll have a couple of more videos on in this series in order to help with other disorders and even just the general chapters in the Brain Facts